Okay, you can be seated. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Baez, we're going to continue on with opening statements. Mr. Baez.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I please support? William, Mariah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Have you ever thought of your death? You're in a hospital. Your body's ravaged by disease. Who do you want there beside you in these final precious moments? How do you want them to see you? How will you handle the fear that death is right there? The anxiety. As your body starts to break down and you gasp for air, and the pain of the disease that you're suffering from overcomes you. What do you concentrate on? Pain? Trying to breathe? The fluid in your lungs begins to rattle. There have been bad deaths, and that's a phrase you can all be familiar with by the end of this trial. Sometimes foam comes up in your mouth, you cough up blood. Dying is a terrible, terrible, ugly thing. In this case, I am certain for both sides, has created a terrible feeling within us because we have to face death. And it's absolutely something we never want to talk about, think about, or really look into. But there's one thing for certain. We will all experience it one day. Each and every one of us. That's the only certainty. So this case, ladies and gentlemen, is about 100% comfort care. A person's right to live their final moments in peace and dignity. No one is better to determine that than the individuals who are at your side in those final moments. This case covers a wide range of dedicated healthcare professionals, ranging from doctors, nurses, and pharmacists, as well as chaplains, other spiritual advisors. And the one thing that you all need to realize, that in order for you to recognize that this, if this is a murder case, that all of these people were either involved in a conspiracy to commit murder, either were conned by some suave doctor, or are perhaps the dumbest people that ever walked the face of this earth. Each and every one of these patients were not just seen by Dr. William Husel. And each and every one of these patients had multiple healthcare professionals in and around their care. And today I'm going to cover with you quite a bit of extensive information where you will hear things never before disclosed. You will be the new experts as to what exactly happened in this case. So my opening statement will be quite a bit longer than my colleague. And that's because what I want to do is I want to set you up in a framework of how you're going to view this evidence and what to look for and how it all connects. It's a complex case, and my job is to try and make it a little simpler and easier to understand so you can actually apply the law to it. And one of the things that you're going to recognize right off the bat is there's no such thing as a medical murder case. And that this is not a murder case. And it's far from it. William Husel was exercising compassion to his patients and tried to free them from pain and let their last moments on earth be ones of peace. Because that's what his patients would have wanted, and that's exactly what his patient's family wanted, even when they begged him to make sure that they were comfortable. Now, what I'm going to cover with you is first an outline of how we got here. And that's because it's really important if you think about it. Everybody wants to know, how in the world did this all happen? How did we get here? And you're going to recognize the series of events that took place that are downright shocking. And there are going to be moments where I'm going to tell you, please take note of this. Because that's what I want you to look for as this case progresses. And after I tell you how we got here, I'm going to cover with you some of the issues with the law that this case simply cannot overcome. And I don't mean it as a technicality. I mean it as you'll see that because it's not a murder case, this case doesn't belong in this forum. There can be all types of criticism of these people, because I include them, including William Husel. There can be all types of criticism, but there will not be any evidence of a criminal act. To the contrary, you recall my colleague mentioning what this case is not about. Well, that's not what they want you to think about, and you're going to shortly see why. So, let me tell you first about who Dr. William Husel is. William is married to Mariah, a nurse we met at Mount Carmel, and they have two lovely, beautiful daughters. And I can assure you that they are what this case is ultimately about for William. William Husel is a local Ohio boy. Born and raised in Cleveland. His father worked in mass transit. His mother was a stay-at-home mom. Comes from a very blue-collar family. But as you can see, after graduating from Ohio State, he took a series of educational degrees, which included performing medical research at Case Western University, graduating from medical school at Ohio University. He completed a residency of 4 years at the Cleveland Clinic, a very prestigious place where the best of the best are trained. Subsequent to that, he completed a critical care fellowship at the Cleveland Clinic that lasted a year. And his very first job was at Mount Carmel. If you look at this and add it up, it is a series of 17 years of higher education. And the state of Ohio wants to convince you that despite the 17 years of trying to be a doctor, that he decided to end people's lives so that they live in 5 minutes as opposed to 10 minutes. I'll tell you right off the bat, we dispute that these patients were not terminally ill, and you're going to see that clearly. In fact, it's always been everyone's position that these were terminally ill patients until much later. So, how did we all get here? I think a good starting point is right here. These are all of the palliative withdrawals that we were able to get from Mount Carmel's hospital. And it covers a list from 2014 all the way to the very last one, which occurred November 20th, 2018. As you see, one of his first palliative withdrawals are 200 micrograms of fentanyl, 200. And then he met a patient by the name of Tracy Young. Tracy Young is someone you will hear repeatedly throughout this trial because it is a watershed moment in this case and in the experience of Dr. William Husel. Tracy experienced what is known as a bad death. She was gasping for air. She was suffering, trying to lift herself up as she was being palliative extubated. William initially gave her 500 micrograms. That didn't work. She continued to suffer in pain. Gave her another 500. Continued to suffer in pain. Then he gave her 1,000. That still wasn't enough. And then he gave her another 500 more. Tracy Young went on to live another 9 days after the fentanyl had exited her system. This experience is critical in this case because, as you can see, 2,500 micrograms is higher than each and every person given thereafter. So if the intent is there to kill, you would think that the dose would be even higher than 2,500, not less. And that is going to be the most critical thing that you should keep in your pocket as you go through this case. Doctors learn 3 ways. One, through their education. The other one is experience, which is this. And then also through research. Medical journals, articles, studies, things that are done. Because while we call it a science, it is scientifically based. There are nuances to medicine. And every doctor is different. Equally qualified, equally trained doctors will think completely differently on many, many different occasions. And that will be, nothing will ring truer than that in this case. So take a second and imagine this. Your very first bad death, and that's experienced in this case. And I want to tell you something else. Once William Husel was a suspect in this case, and he was immediately fired, he had one of his civil lawyer try and get the records of Tracy Young. And you're going to hear this evidence where after attempting to get the records of Tracy Young, which is the watershed moment, to show, I'm not a killer, this is the reason why I give these doses, because people suffer in pain, and I'm the one at bedside. These nurses are the ones at bedside. They know what these patients are going through, much more so than anyone else. Now, having said that, the hospital responded they had no record of Tracy Young dying at Mount Carmel Hospital. You'll hear evidence, ladies and gentlemen, that they knew about Tracy Young early on in the investigation and never even disclosed it to the police at its onset. And I'm going to go over that in just a moment. But as you can see, after Tracy Young, the different patients required different doses based on their physiology, based on how sick they were. I'm going to go over with you a list of factors that are very common in determining what a patient should receive based on their current state. And each and every patient was different. Some never even got fentanyl. Some got other types of medicine. So this case really unfolded and came to light in October of 2018. And this was by a patient of the name of James Timmons. One of the very last patients. You heard my colleague mention that William was Doctor of the Year in 2014. That's because of the excellence that he provided of patient care and actually hard work. He was also nominated in 2018, again. But of course, things didn't end up working out for him. You're going to see, ladies and gentlemen, that upon James Timmons being given the 1,000 micrograms of fentanyl, there's a process of how the orders go in. And Ms. Grubbs didn't explain that to you, but I'm going to explain it to you right now. So, first off, the doctor orders the medicine. But what you have to realize, in the ICU, there is one doctor for 30 beds. So the person that coordinates the care is the nurse. We've all been to hospitals. We know that the person you see the most is the nurse. They're the most involved in your care. They know how sick you are. And there are a series of safeguards that are set up to prevent this from happening and to actually ensure that patient safety is a must. And let me tell you how it works. Dr. Husel will order the medication. The nurse will either enter the order if it's a verbal order or retrieve the medication from a machine that's called a Pixis machine. Okay? After that, a pharmacist is supposed to verify the order. Now, there's going to be a lot of debate with pharmacists in this case. But a pharmacist is the person in charge of the medications. It's a 50-50 responsibility between the pharmacist and the doctor. There are no pharmacists on trial here, but yet they're 50% responsible for every single dose that's given. Subsequent to all of this happening, there's the attending physician, who is the designated doctor in charge of the patient's care throughout their stay at the hospital. Kind of like a quarterback, so to speak, of their care. Now, William Husel was not the attending for any one of these patients, any of the patients in question. So essentially, when a patient passes away at a hospital, the attending physician will review the medical records and then actually write out a cause of death and issue what's called a discharge summary. It's basically, this is everything that happened here in the hospital. And that's why I showed you the picture of all of those people. Any doctor giving these orders relies on these safeguards to take place. Now what's fascinating, folks, is that you're going to hear that doctors don't even know where the nurses get the medication. They know it's coming from a machine. They don't really get involved in the process. They give the order, or they write the order, and that's it. They monitor the medication after it's administered, and all of those things take place. But as far as getting the medication, drawing the vials, doing all of that work, that's all done by the nurse. Now, you're going to hear that Mount Carmel had a big problem. And that was that there was a glitch in their system that allowed the nurses to do what's called a scan to order, which basically means they scan the vial and they enter in the order at the same time, and somehow, unbeknownst to William Husel and any other doctor, including anyone else involved, the orders never went to the pharmacy. Now that's not with all of the patients. It's only with a couple of patients. But it was when this happened in Jeffrey Timmons' situation that this all came to light. A pharmacist's main job is to be the keys, the gatekeeper of medicine at a hospital. And there's a huge problem when controlled substances are not being controlled. Immediately upon this happening, one of the pharmacists named Talon Schroyer, he immediately raised the issue. Wait a minute. And the way it came to Talon Schroyer's attention was a nurse call and say, hey, I just wanted to make sure that you're aware we did this order. But he looked at the system and didn't see it in there for him to approve. That's a huge, huge problem. You don't have control of controlled substances. Pharmacists can face criminal penalties, so can a hospital. They can lose their funding for Medicaid and Medicare. And you'll see, ladies and gentlemen, there's no way in the world that a hospital will be able to survive, especially Mount Carmel, without seeing Medicare and Medicaid patients. Huge, huge problems. But it wasn't a patient harm issue. This was considered a diversion issue, meaning they thought maybe they're stealing drugs over at the ICU. That was a suspicion of Talon Schroyer. And he spoke with his colleague, Greg Dresbach. Now, they're going to tell you that they were concerned about the high doses, but they're also going to admit that this was really about, Talon Schroyer will say, I thought it was diversion. There's a huge problem with diversion, and that was their main focus. He was so focused about this murder and this high dose that he mentioned it to his supervisor 5 minutes as he was getting off shift. He didn't stop, he didn't pick up the phone, he didn't leave and go talk to Dr. Husel. No one spoke to Dr. Husel. And then, at that point, that's when they first did what's called a voice report. It now gets into the system. It's now official. Something's going on here. But it was done by a woman named Katie Barger, who worked in risk management. Essentially, James Timmons, or Talon Schroyer, told his supervisor, Randy Miles. Randy Miles escalated it to Katie Barger. So what happens now is she enters this in at what's called a level 4, which has two significant things. One, it means it's not a patient care issue, it's not an emergency, so nobody got hurt here. There's no life-threatening situation. And two, it stays within Mount Carmel. It does not go to their parent company, which is Trinity Health. That's critical. So if you think about it, this is just a normal concern. Now I want to tell you why, and I want to point out to you why you're going to see that this was not an issue about the high dose, because everybody knew William Husel was very aggressive when he came to pain meds at end-of-life care. He was comfortable with this amount, with these amounts, because of his anesthesiology background and his experience. And you're also going to hear and find out that Talon Schroyer had previously approved Brandy McDonald's medication for 1,000. So as you can see, 1,000 now, it's not the same, it's not a concern. He had already approved that. He also had approved previously Bonnie Austin's medication, who's another patient in this indictment. You're also going to hear about 6 months earlier, there was an email sent out to all the pharmacists about being concerned about these high doses for various reasons. One, there's no policy at Mount Carmel. The pharmacist had no guide as to what the max dose is. Neither did the doctors. Neither did the nurses. You heard Ms. Grubbs tell you about a subset. Those are recommendations, and those are in a policy that basically does not advise the doctor, does not take the discretion away from the doctor when he or she sees that their patient is in pain. There are no max guidelines at Mount Carmel at this time. And this was a discussion amongst pharmacists for months. And they all knew about it. And not a single one raised a concern or yelled, "Murder!" These are trained professionals on the pharmacology of these drugs, and they didn't raise a single concern. So what happens next is Sandra Castle. Sandra Castle is also a scandal lawyer, a completely different nurse. And it doesn't go to the pharmacy again. At this time, Randy Miles, the manager at the pharmacy, knows they got a big problem. More drugs are going out without the pharmacy even looking at it. So then, after that, the second voice report is brought up to the head of medicine, a Dr. Swanner. And it's made he's made aware of this issue. They don't take Dr. Husel off the schedule. They don't even go speak to him. They don't say a word to him. They're not concerned with murder. And then the next patient happens, Melissa Penix. Melissa Penix is the last patient. Randy Miles brings it up again, but this one actually got what's called retrospectively reviewed, which means it was looked at by a pharmacist and approved after drugs were administered, which is also an acceptable thing in certain situations. So all of this is going down with all of these different people involved, and it's finally at this point that they have a meeting and decide to put Dr. Husel on leave. Again, not a single person has come to Dr. Husel and talked to him and said, "Hey, why are you giving these amounts? What's your reasoning behind these doses? Can you explain yourself?" Not a single opportunity to defend himself or his reasoning. The next thing that happens is, after he's put on leave, they call him in finally. And he meets with the head of medicine and the head of ICU. And they have this meeting, and they talk to him about his dosing. And they ask him, "Are you comfortable? Why are you issuing these doses?" And this is his explanation.
Hold on, we got an objection.
Move to approach.
Yes. Come on up. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Shaver's going to come over and talk to you all for a second. Okay? Ask her about her 2 daughters.
Good morning, guys.
Let's go. Can you go to the side?
Nice weekend. Enjoy yourself. Yeah.
I took my 4-year-old out to lunch.
Oh. Did you have the day off yesterday?
I did.
I coached my daughter.
You may continue on.
Thank you. So, as I was saying, he gets called in for the first time. They then don't accuse him of murder. They then determine that they're going to create a policy for dose amounts, and they ask Dr. Husel if he'll be part of that committee. This is after knowing these things. There's no murder case. None whatsoever. 2 days after this meeting, they renew his privileges at the hospital. Then something happens. A meeting is scheduled to discuss the pharmacy concerns. And things start unfolding and realizing how big a problem they have at the pharmacy and what that will mean to the future of the hospital. It's at this point where it goes up to Trinity Health. Trinity Health has a director of medicine review one sheet of paper, a spreadsheet. No medical records. She couldn't access the medical records. But once she actually had this document, and with no real clinical care experience, she made a determination that this was euthanasia. And therein started the downfall of Dr. William Husel. Let me get this up. So, the very first thing that Mount Carmel does is they go and hire one of Columbus's best criminal defense attorneys. Doesn't need it. They're now realizing they have no control of any controlled substances, and they are in immediate jeopardy of losing their funding for Medicaid and Medicare. And this defense lawyer sets up a meeting with his former boss of 14 years. This attorney is a very well-respected member of this legal community and set up a meeting, a private meeting with his former boss, and outlined the case for them and brought them the case of Dr. William Husel. This is not how your typical cases get developed, but that's exactly what happened in this case. And that's an undisputed fact that you will all hear about. Once this occurs, at the same day that they're running this, Mount Carmel started this thing, and actually Trinity Health, which is the parent company, started something that is called Project Lighthouse. They even had a code word for it. Project Lighthouse. It's as if this hospital was in search for their moral compass in a perfect storm that would only sink one man. And that one man was William Husel. Upon this Project Lighthouse, they immediately discovered Tracy Young's records. But they didn't give it to law enforcement. In fact, they gave them very little. Besides the case, they gave very little to support it. And they immediately terminated William Husel's employment. What happens next, ladies and gentlemen, is about to shock you. The very first person to interview witnesses to a murder are not detectives. They're human resources at Mount Carmel, followed by risk management by Mount Carmel. Then they let the detectives talk to the nurses and pharmacists. And when they let detectives talk to the nurses and pharmacists, they don't even give them the patient's names. They don't give them the medical records to look at how sick these people were. They don't give them any information other than the dose amount and the date. That's what a detective is sent into a hospital to determine what a murder is, whether a murder occurred. That is the information they're given. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear they could have easily gotten the investigative subpoena and gotten all that information like that. But the one dictating this investigation is not the police department. It's Mount Carmel. And you will draw no other conclusion than that because that's what the evidence will show you. Once that occurs, the attorneys give them certain information, which is their interactions, who they talk to in their investigation. And then they create the very first new revised palliative ventilator or withdrawal policy that sets a maximum dose. William Husel never had the benefit of that. They then get the comments of Ms. Toka Bradley on the 16th, after she has the access to the records now. Now she's got the records, and her position slightly changes. She says, this might have been part of his pharmacology to alleviate pain, so that they did suffer and they ended life in a more humane way. That was her opinion after the initial euthanasia concept, but they never disclosed that to the police. Mount Carmel never describes that change of position to them. Instead, things go forward all ahead with Project Lighthouse. Now, Project Lighthouse is more than just an investigation. It's an outright attack, a full frontal attack on William Husel, which includes a media playbook. How are they going to explain this to everyone? How are they going to deflect? How are they going to make him out to be a villain? You may think those are just my words. They're not. One of the determinations that they have to do is create this playbook, and it comes straight from the top at Trinity Health. Our plan should include a playbook we'll follow once we decide to disclose all the facts, whether due to leaks, meaning do they leak this to the media secretly, or in a more controlled way in collaboration with the prosecutor. Melissa's already assembling this playbook for the internal and Columbus community. That's you folks. So let's be sure we have it on the national level too. This will include ensuring senior leadership team is prepared to reach out to key stakeholders. And then they have this discussion. This is a confidential document, never seen before by anyone. And it says, who is the villain in our victim, villain, vindicator, crisis communications narrative? Choices: Husel, Husel nurses and pharmacists, culture at the ICU night shift, the act of killing someone with pain meds. And then they have discussion topics, which include Husel is popular with some staff and may even remain popular as a martyr for dying, even if indicted. Ed's decision, Ed is the president of Mount Carmel, was Husel's the primary villain, included pharmacists, not the one who reported the voice report, and the nurses, not with the two preceptors, those are nurses in training, as co-villains who made poor decisions and chose to ignore a series of protocols and safeguards. Ladies and gentlemen, Trinity Health initiated this, and when a $20 billion corporation wants to make you out to be a villain, that's exactly what they do. Some of the other topics include prosecutors prosecutor has already lauded our response and may do so publicly. If we want to appear contrite over this, overdoing our response may diminish the contrition. Some will say our culture and training led to this, and we're as much at fault as Husel. Ed's decision is to factually describe the timeline in a way that's transparent and accurate. Well, that was his decision. Include the October triggering event with the context that it was out of character for Husel and appropriately referred to peer review. Yes, the October event was out of character for William Husel. This is what was in play behind the background and behind the scenes, with every press release, every press statement made. Here are some of the way they changed certain things. Version 1227 versus less than 2 weeks later. They basically said that this former employee ordered fatal doses of pain medication. It was later changed to significantly excessive and potentially fatal doses. That's a huge difference of what's potentially might happen, might be fatal, versus fatal. Everyone always remembers the first statement, not the second, third, or fourth. And that's how this narrative slowly changed. They then had a series of articles where healthcare professionals were killing people to generate interest amongst the media, to paint him out as a villain. This is why we don't want you watching the news, why we don't want you researching this case, because you're going to learn everything you need to know right here, right from that witness stand. And then there's the issue that they face of what is called CMS, the Center for Medicaid Services. And if you look at this, we continue to cooperate fully with the Ohio Department of Health, Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services, and other regulators to investigate Dr. Husel's actions. And then at the end over here on the second paragraph, as a result, Mount Carmel West has asked, and we anticipate will be asked to submit an action plans to improve the pharmacy process. The issues at the pharmacy. They act like William Husel worked in the pharmacy. And this is where all this case unfolds. So as you can see, they added a new protocol to set maximum appropriate doses, and they realize at this point in time they are going to be placed in immediate jeopardy of losing the ability to see Medicaid and Medicare patients because of what's going on at the pharmacy. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, these narratives change over time. And then on 116, immediate jeopardy is determined. They get placed on immediate jeopardy, and they get their official notice on 130 that they are in immediate jeopardy. Yet the investigation continues in the background with little to no information given to the detectives. They have a hospital telling them he's a killer, these are excessive doses, but that's not what the healthcare providers are telling them. Every nurse, every pharmacist interviewed that were participating in the care of these patients expressed their opinions. They're all independent healthcare professionals who did not have issues with these doses until it was brought to the attention of the pharmacy that they were being circumvented. Now, ladies and gentlemen, It's within these set of facts that William Husel now stands trial for his life.
Objection.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you can disregard the last statement.
It's within these facts that William Husel stands trial for murder. Now, there are numerous obstacles and issues with the state's case, and they're big, gaping hole issues. For example, let me set this up. I want to cover with you a couple of things. And I remember during jury selection, there was this whole thing about could you follow the law even though you morally disagree with it. And I told you, we're not going to ask you to not follow the law. In fact, we're going to ask you to let the law be your guide. And some of the issues that you're going to cover or go through in this case deal with what I call pick. Because essentially you get to pick which one of these, as you weigh the evidence, will clearly show you that William Husel is innocent. Purpose and intent mean the same thing. You'll hear it interchangeably through the jury instructions that the judge is going to give you, and as we all agree, you're going to follow the judge's instructions. And causation. Okay, so in light of that, the first thing that I want you to look at is there's going to be a lot of talk about potential side effects of these drugs. So, what does the side effect, they have to prove, remember we talked about the burden of proof, that the side effect occurred. There are a couple of things that you need to know right off the bat. And when it comes to respiratory, distress, depression, forgive me if I can't spell something, and arrest. And you're going to need to know these terms from the very beginning of this trial. Respiratory distress is what a person suffers as they're going through end-of-life care. The agonal breathing, the gurgling, the death rattle, all of these things. That is what a healthcare provider looks at. Their distress. Are they in pain? Depression means slowing down the breathing. And arrest is when you stop breathing. One of the potential side effects of fentanyl and these benzodiazepines are respiratory depression. But the issue is, did respiratory arrest occur? And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that even though there are tons of healthcare records in this case, you're not going to see it there at all. And that is their burden and their burden alone to prove to you. And they will not be able to do it. And this side effect goes into William Husel's intent, and it also addresses the issue of causation. I'll explain what I mean in a minute about intent. This is something you're going to need to know as well, and I hope you can all see this. There are two types of life support. The ventilator, which everybody's already talked about a lot, and here, I can take this down. No, not that one. Not that. Keep that there, please. This one. And what's called vasopressors. Vasopressors are basically medicine that's inserted through one of the tubes that gets the blood pressure going, helps the heart keep beating. And this is critical to the issue of actually cardiac arrest. Now, there are two ways that doctors determine death. One is by brain dead, a person being brain dead, and then the other one, cardiac death. Now, there's something you need to realize. Once a case gets started, and that media starts going, there are all kinds of stories. Many of the patients gave interviews on the media, and each and every one of them filed a lawsuit against William Husel in Mount Carmel. Now, one of the other things you should know right off the bat is that each and every one of these witnesses were spoken to after the hospital spoke to them. Meaning, the police didn't go speak to these witnesses in murder cases first. The hospital did. Mount Carmel, in their Project Lighthouse, had a script that they had their doctors use to call and specifically disclose this information to each and every patient. And they did so before the police got to speak to them. Many of them had already gotten lawyers before the police actually spoke to them. In fact, there's a whole slew of them that were spoken to at their lawyer's office. Lawyers who have a financial interest in this case. They get a percentage of whatever they recover on behalf of these patients. And it happened after. It's head-scratching. If this is going to be a head-scratching investigation to you, and you're going to wonder, how did the police allow the hospital to dictate this investigation? So, we submit to you that the evidence will show each and every one of these deaths, the issue is going to be cardiac arrest in terms of the death. So basically, your heart stops, you die, you're dead. So now the issue before you, ladies and gentlemen, that you have to determine is, did the heart stop first, and then the patient started breathing and stopped breathing after? Or did the patient stop breathing first, and then the heart stopped after? Why is that important? Because these drugs, they're alleging that it's respiratory depression. So, if their heart stopped first, fentanyl and whatever drug they got was irrelevant. Because it's the effect, the target that they're claiming the side effect is the breathing. You understand? This is what you will be listening to and trying to determine as this case goes. Again, you're not going to be able to know that. There's some evidence in the records that we will point out that will show a heart stop first. But again, we don't have to prove anything. We do not have that burden of proof. They will have to prove to you that these patients incurred a side effect and that they stopped breathing before their heart stopped. If you're dead when your heart stops, you're dead. And all the drugs in the world aren't going to matter. That's the issue here that is not provable in any way, much less beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. You are going to have a doubt, and then some. Doubt upon doubt upon doubt. Now, the side effects, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of debate in the literature as to what the actual side effects are. Many journals list that respiratory depression is a rare or uncommon side effect to these medicines. Certain ones will use it as uncommon, some as rare. That's a huge issue here. There are brilliant doctors throughout the world who can't agree as to whether side effects occur, whether they're common, whether they're definitely going to happen. And again, we're getting into the unknown and world of second opinions. Second opinions are not beyond the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, ladies and gentlemen. Especially when there's tons of literature out there that say that respiratory depression is a rare or uncommon side effect. It's a side effect, but it's like aspirin or any other medication. There's tons of different potential side effects that happen, and they have to prove that the side effect occurred. They have that sole burden. So as you go through the evidence, you have to find out where's the evidence that shows the side effect occurred. There's also literature that say opioids do not hasten death. And again, as I mentioned to you, doctors learn through their education, experience, and research. There are journals out there that say, contrary to the belief, numerous studies and reviews of opioids and sedatives worldwide are clear that they do not hasten death or alter survival. When given after withdrawing ventilator support, they do not hasten death. Indeed, even in those fully dependent upon mechanical support, opioids and benzodiazepines enable breathing to be more comfortable and to continue longer after ventilator withdrawal due to their beneficial effect on the respiratory efficiency. Let me tell you what that means. Person gets off the ventilator, they start gasping for air. That takes their reserves, their energy away. When they have the fentanyl and sedative medications, that calms their breathing down. Calms them. So they breathe naturally. And there is research out there that you'll see that shows that people sometimes live even longer. They live even longer because of the opioids. Because now they can rest and breathe naturally. And their reserves aren't depleted. Meaning, you can only breathe like that for a short period of time until you tire out and die. And the opioids actually alleviate that. This is not something made up by William Husel. This is a well-established issue that members of Mount Carmel told the police about. But they didn't do anything to follow up on that. And you'll see that as the case unfolds. It's a vast, well-known fact. But there are doctors on both sides of this issue. And I have to be fair and tell you that. The most brilliant minds in the world cannot make that determination, but they want you to. They want you to make that conclusion. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, it's just not possible under the high legal standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. There are no maximum doses in the industry. You heard Mr. Zion tell you that during jury selection. It's true. There's no set doses because medicine believes it's the doctor at the bedside who's best to determine whether this patient needs more medicine. They want you to take medicine out of the hands of the doctors and nurses at bedside and give it to a prosecutor. And that's essentially what this case will be about, too. Then there's this thing called the doctrine of double effect. The maximum doses strictly go to Dr. Husel's intent, as well as the issue of causation. No policy strictly goes to his intent. If there's a policy with a maximum dose limit, don't you all think that that's the fair thing for a doctor to determine, okay, that's the line I can't cross, so therefore, I will not cross that line. And you can make an easy determination whether in fact this person is guilty of killing someone by way of medication. But absent anything in the standards, that there's no maximum dose in medicine, or the fact that there's no policy setting the limit, no one spoke to him. Never. Until November 26th, after all of this is over. They all knew about it. No one spoke to him. You know where they spoke to him? He's Doctor of the Year in 2014. He's nominated for Doctor of the Year of 2018. That's them speaking to him. The medical studies address the issue of intent and causation. All you need, remember, pick purpose, intent, and causation. All you need is one of these to make the determination that the charges were not proven. Then there's this doctrine of double effect that is a staple in medicine, brought all the way from St. Thomas Aquinas. And that basically says that if a doctor has a good intent and a secondary effect happens, like death, that it is fully permissible so long as the doctor's intent was to do what was intended. In this case, comfort care. If William Husel intended on giving comfort care, and the outcome or the cause of that comfort care was the death, it falls under the doctrine of double effect. The doctrine of double effect explains how the bad consequences of an action can be considered ethically justified if the original intent was a good intention. The DDE aims to describe the best practice when a clinician must distinguish the positive benefits of an intervention against the known foreseeable but unintended risks and burdens of such therapy. And that goes for everything. You go into surgery, you know it's high risk. The intent is to save you and to do something, but ultimately a mistake happens or something happens and you die. Same thing. It also applies to comfort care. The doctrine states that a doctor uses measures, usually opioids, to alleviate symptoms at the end of life, which might, as a secondary effect, shorten life, provides the doctor's intention is the good outcome of symptom relief rather than the bad. The traditional application of the double effect indicates that one can administer pain meds even if the patient's death is foreseen. Unintended consequences. There's so much area here for you to find reasonable doubt. It is our position that these drugs did not cause the death. From one, his experience, to the articles that are contrary to that position out there. But even if you find that that was the issue, he is ethically justified in giving these payments. Sometimes the relief of suffering, the intended good effect, also has the potential bad effect, which is foreseen, but not the primary intention, hence the double effect. The doctrine of double effect states that a harmful result of treatment, even resulting in death, is permissible if not intended and occurs as a side effect to a beneficial action.
May we approach?
You may. Ladies and gentlemen, entertain yourselves there for a second, unless you want the dreaded white noise. Trust me, you don't want it. Ms. Schaefer? Yeah. Tell me when you're ready, Sam.
All right, Your Honor.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we submit to you that the doctrine of double effect specifically addresses Williams' intent. Now,
Objection, Your Honor.
I'll give him the transition. I assume you're moving on.
yes, I'm moving on.
Move on.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, so does Williams' experience. And that specifically issues the issue of intent and causation. This can and should never be ignored. Now, in light of that, there's also the process. you're going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, as I explained earlier, that these safeguards are put in place to protect the patients and everyone else involved. Now, what's also interesting for you to note, ladies and gentlemen, is that doctors rely on this. So, for example, there were 2 occasions throughout all of this time where pharmacists came to William Husel to question the issue of the dose, and that was because of a fentanyl shortage. Not because of the dose amount. You'll hear evidence, ladies and gentlemen, that one of the patients was ordered 1,000, and the pharmacist suggested 500 because of the fentanyl shortage. Not for any other reason other than the fact that there was a shortage of fentanyl. Now, if you're the doctor giving these orders, and pharmacists, and you know pharmacists are coming to talk to you, this is all out in the open, ladies and gentlemen. As it relates to murder, you're not going to hear any evidence of some doctor walking around with a syringe in the middle of the night, poking people, or doing anything crazy like that. Every single order was given. Every single order was in the records. William Husel, everything is out in the open. There is nothing in terms of this being some hidden, suspicious, nefarious act. In addition to that, on Daddy Millette, one of the pharmacists came as well and questioned because of the fentanyl shortage. Now, this process should give and address the issue of intent as well. Because William Husel's not aware that the nurse is doing standard orders, and you're not going to hear any evidence of that. And William Husel's not briefed as to whether the pharmacist gets the order or doesn't. It's if the pharmacist intercedes or interacts is when it becomes an issue. And you'll see through the evidence that it's happened in the past. So one is to know my doses are being checked. Everything's okay. I'm doctor of the year, and everything is going as expected. Now I want to address finally the patients. I think the patients warrant their own consideration. I didn't want to get too much into detail. But there's things that you should consider. When evaluating this evidence, you've got to realize that pain management in the living is very different than pain management in the dying. You have to get ahead of the pain as a person dies. You don't want to see them suffering and then address the issue. I know Ms. Scruggs addressed that during her opening, and we respectfully disagree. And so do doctors. And that's what the evidence you're going to see in this case. There are numerous factors that a doctor takes into consideration when a person is dying, as opposed to whether they're healthy. If their blood pressure is normal, the meds can go through the body relatively quickly. If it's low, a higher dose is needed to compensate for the fact that it can't go through your system before it gets to your brain. That's a factor you're going to need to know. Their pH levels, their acidosis, that's another factor. There are numerous factors, including the weight of the patient, their tolerance, a whole slew of factors that you're going to find and evaluate as this goes through. It's not just a tolerance and weight issue. It's much more complex than that. And it's also complex in the fact that who's to say they're suffering when they can't speak? The family and the nurse. And that's what's at issue here. All these incredible doses that were killer doses, 2 of them required more additional doses. 2 of the charged cases here required more because they still were in pain. Mr. Timmons was still in pain. Danny Milletti was still in pain. They got more doses, as did Brian Hayes. It wasn't enough. There's that hidden factor as well. Mount Carmel has services, an area that's in the epicenter of the opioid epidemic. And you heard a lot of talk about fentanyl overdoses during jury selection. But the fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, those drugs are different. We don't know what comes from Mexico and China that hits the streets. We don't know what those drugs are, whether they're synthetic. We don't know if other chemicals are put in these drugs that are on the street. Very, very different. And you should not compare the same. A good example would be Ryan Hayes, who was initial drug screened from urine, did not show fentanyl. His autopsy showed carfentanil. That's an elephant tranquilizer. An elephant tranquilizer. And you will hear that that is 100 times stronger than fentanyl. This is what a doctor has to anticipate and deal with, and then be called a murderer. Factors in dying that doctors considered are, of course, the pain, the suffering, which includes that of the family, and respiratory distress. And remember what I told, how I outlined the different respiratory terms. The dose factors are numerous, not just one or two. They're going to be numerous, and that will all be laid out for you in the course of this trial. And this is just a sample of some of the health conditions. Ms. Grubbs told you some of these people could have left the hospital. These are all 14 patients. Troy Allison had 4 cardiac arrests in the hospital. He had 2 in the emergency room. The doctor walked away in the emergency room for a few minutes, and he died again. They had to bring him back to life. They had to give him, ultimately it was determined he had 5 organ failures. They don't call them your vital organs for nothing. And just one vital organ failure will kill you. He had 5. He was on vasopressors. Vasopressors are what I explained to you earlier, helps the blood pumping, keeps the blood going, the heart. But look at his last blood pressure, 74/33. He was actively dying on life support. This is after the vasopressors and after the ventilation, breathing for him. He's dying. Tubes coming out of his body. One thing you're going to learn about these vasopressors is when they're turned off, the effect is 1 minute to 2 minutes. We submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that a majority of these deaths occurred because the vasopressors were turned off. Look at these blood pressures. If the vasopressor is keeping your blood pressure, your blood pumping, heart pumping, and you turn them off, it's seconds to minutes. No one is going to be able to tell you exactly how long. Jeremiah Hodge had 4 cardiac arrests in the hospital. 4 for Danny Millette, 5 for Bonnie Austin. Look at all of these cardiac arrests. The heart is stopping. And remember what I told you about what happens first, the heart stopping, or whether you stop breathing.
Okay, let's get back to opening statement, please.
And as you can see, the pH levels. This is something you're going to learn about. And let me just give you a brief look at this. pH levels are guided from 8 to 6.8. If it's too high, you die. If it's too low, it's death. Look at the pH levels of some of these. 6.8 is death. Some are walking miracles. And some are very close to death, as you can see. Very different than what Ms. Gross told you about. And all of this will come out in the trial. Ladies and gentlemen, the state of Ohio is telling you that this is medically assisted death. This is a case about medical assisted death. And as the evidence will show you, that nothing could be further from the truth. A set of circumstances put William Husel here, but the effects and everything else will be clear to you. And please remember that standard beyond and to the exclusion of reason, every reasonable doubt. We submit to you that it wasn't medical assisted death. He was giving medically assisted and living. These patients had just moments left in their lives, and he assisted them in living well. You can't hug, you can't hold your loved one with tubes coming out of their body, looking like this, in excruciating pain. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, this is a case that does not belong in this court. And you will recognize that if you keep an open mind and listen for all of the evidence in this case. You're also going to see a determination of how this case, once it got to the police and once it initiated, how it changed, the narrative changed. And now you know why. We hope that you keep an open mind. This is the most important day in Dr. William Husel's life and that of his family. And we thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Baez. Can you remove the, I like to see the jury when I talk to them.
Sure. Sorry.
I don't control that.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me shut down. Okay, we're going to reach the next phase of the trial. I'm going to do a little bit of an explanation about what goes on in the next phase. It's getting close to the lunch hour, and I don't think you really, Mrs. Zion, I don't think you want to call a witness for 10 minutes. Do you want to call a witness for 10 minutes? What I was thinking about doing is me doing the explanation of evidence and stuff, and then starting back at 1 o'clock.
I think that perhaps we'd all be a little fresher with after a break to start evidence if we're going to do 10 minutes of admonishments and whatnot. So.
Okay,
We
fair
would
enough
concur.
then.